men experience abuse. God gave man, woman to help him. The man begins to stay away from home, smoking, drinking, keeping late nights, etc. Hello, me loves. How are you all doing? Welcome back to my channel. The name, as always, is Chioma. Welcome to the part 2 of my domestic violence video. Right, so if you're sitting there wondering, oh, part 2, where is part 1? I haven't seen part 1. There's going to be a link up on the screen, but you can also find a link in the description box. So please, I would encourage you to actually go watch that video first before coming to this one, because it's going to make a lot more sense. In the previous part to this video, I started off with reading a comment. I'm not going to read all of that comment again, so please go and watch that video because I'm just continuing that conversation in this video. Okay, I didn't complete my discussion, so I'm going to quickly wrap that up by talking about the cycle of violence. Depending on the source of your information, some people have put forward a 3-staged cycle of violence, and some other sources would quote a 4-staged cycle of violence. But it really doesn't matter. I don't want you to get caught up in 3 or 4 stages. It really doesn't matter, because the key elements within that cycle are captured in all of the stages, whether you're looking at 3 stages or 4 stages. So the first stage in the cycle of violence is the honeymoon phase. And this phase can last, there's no time frame on how long it would last, depending on the particular relationship. It can last anywhere from a few days to even months. So this is where, as you can tell, things seem to be going well, and there is a certain hope, especially for the abused person, that things would continue that way. The abused person might also base all of their hopes on the abuser changing, on some of the things that happen within the honeymoon phase. So those hopes and expectations of the abuser changing might be based on some of the things that happen within the honeymoon phase. Okay, so stage 2 is the build-up or the tension phase. So this is where things are beginning to escalate slowly. Okay, maybe some people, I'm talking about the abuser in this context, has started dropping hints like, if you do that again, you're not going to find it funny what I will do. If you do that again, I won't be held responsible for my actions. So at this stage, for the abused person, okay, it's a critical phase because they know it is coming. Even though they are holding on hope, on the one hand, on the other hand, they do know that there really isn't anything they can do to stop the escalation of those behaviors. The third stage would be the violent stage. Okay, so that is when the bubble busts. Okay, this is when the abused person would be actively getting beaten, kicked, strangled, if physical violence is a strong element in that relationship. Or it could be an escalation of some of the other forms of violence, or a combination of any of those forms of violence. So it might also look like the abuser seizing the abused person's cards, like their credit cards, debit cards, just to restrict their access to finances. It might be them locking them out of some of their own property or privileges, denying them access to those privileges. I have heard about women whose partners would seize the keys to their cars just so that they can't go anywhere. Some even go as far as stopping the woman from going to work, jeopardizing her employment. Some sources go on to quote a 4th stage, which would be the remorse phase. So this is where the abuser comes around again and apologizes for their behaviors, blames the devil, or even blames the person they are abusing for the escalation of their behaviors. Like, I've told you not to do that. Whenever you do that, this is what happens to me. And when this happens to me, I can't control myself. And then I just lash out and I hate you. Never mind that you have been constantly modifying your behaviors, and every single thing that he has asked you not to do in the past, you try your best not to do it. But then there's always something else that he points out you're doing wrong, which makes him to blow his top and abuse you. That's the remorse phase. And then everything turns around. It turns full cycle and it goes right back into the honeymoon phase again. This cycle gets repeated over several weeks, over several months, over several years in some cases, and it just continues that way. I remember that I left off in part one around the barriers that stop abused people from living abusive relationships. So this cycle is another element to keep in mind when it comes to considering some of those barriers to a woman leaving. It is just that constant cycle of hoping, expecting that someone will change. The person doesn't change. The violence occurs again, and then you're back to square one. The abuser comes around again, apologizes, buys you an even bigger gift, buy you a car gift, and apologizes, says they won't do it again. And sometimes the honeymoon phase might last a little longer than the previous time. And while that is going on in a lot of relationships, that relationship is going through different life cycles as well. Children might have been born, investments might have been made, they've bought a house together, they've bought property together, they've invested in businesses together, and so their lives are becoming even more and more enmeshed. At the time that the abused person is thinking about leaving, there's a lot to lose. I hope that makes sense. You understand what I'm saying? So I just needed to talk a little bit about the cycle of abuse. So in the previous part to this video, I dwelt quite heavily on the gendered aspect of violence. Okay, the fact that for the most part, it is women who are on the receiving end of those abusive behaviors. And for the most part, it is men at the giving end. Okay, they are the perpetrators of violence, and that still stands. But I also want to acknowledge that men experience violence as well. Men experience abuse. Whether it's a man experiencing domestic violence or a woman experiencing domestic violence, the elements are still the same. The impacts are still the same. And for anyone experiencing violence, whether man or woman, I just want to very clearly state that it is not okay. It is not okay whether it's a woman on the perpetrating end or a man on the perpetrating end. It's just not okay. I also want to make it clear that the video I made previously and even this one is coming from the unique experience of being a Nigerian and having a lens on Nigerian culture and society and how things operate in that culture, okay? But I acknowledge that domestic violence, it's something that has so many intersections, okay? There is the intersections of race, of ability, of sexuality. There's lots of intersections, and each of those points of intersection have unique factors to consider when you talk about domestic violence relating to the people who identify within those intersections. So for instance, someone who identifies as a woman from Africa might have unique factors to consider in line with culture and other things that are unique to that experience of being an African woman that maybe a white European woman might not really understand, and which might not apply to the white woman's case, if you get what I mean. So yeah, I do know that in discussing these things, parts of the conversation might not particularly relate to everyone. When we talk about domestic violence, I don't think 2 videos that are 20 minutes long each can do justice to all of the issues that can be discussed under the umbrella of domestic violence. So let's go on to addressing these comments. The man begins to stay away from home, smoking, drinking, keeping late nights, etc. Again, victim blaming. And that element of never taking responsibility for your own actions. It's always someone else who is making you do things. Saying that you're smoking and you're drinking, that's if you've not been a smoker before or a drinker before, and you suddenly start smoking and drinking and doing all of that because, according to you, your wife is abusing you emotionally. You're not taking responsibility for your actions. I know someone might then be saying, oh, there are women who start doing drugs to cope with the abuse. Yes, that is also very possible. But again, going back to what I said in part 1 of this video, the element of fear, power and control, these are the 3 things that make the difference. So whether you're staying out late, smoking and drinking because you can't stand your partner anymore, okay, but there is not that element of your partner consistently exercising power and control over you, consistently making you fear for your safety and your life and your well-being, then my dear, you're just in a bad relationship. It's not a DV relationship. Does that make sense? So the next part of the comments was where this commenter said, not all men have the ability to control emotional trauma. Again, we're talking about an adult here. It is highlighted here as a woman's fault that the man is unable to control themselves. How does that work? One key theme in that comment, generally speaking, was victim blaming. It was quite heavy on the victim blaming. Remember, a lot of what I'm discussing here is in the context of Nigeria. So this is also a very dangerous mentality to say that not all men have the ability to control emotional trauma. I also know that this is some of the sorts of comments, okay? The sentiment in this comment is consistent with what we will hear when a woman is raped, for instance. That is when you hear things like, oh, what was she expecting when she wore stuff like that? When she was out so late in the night, you know? Of course, men would prey on her. They would rape her because of what she's wearing. Again, the victim blaming and that dangerous mindset of promoting this idea that a man is not able to control himself. And when they do not exercise that self-control, it is a woman's fault. It's a woman's fault that a man would see her skin and get sexually aroused to the point where they can't control themselves, and then they just go ahead and force themselves on a woman. And by the way, let me just let you know that in the case of sexual violence, it has nothing to do with what a woman was wearing or where she was at what time of day. Does not, all of those things, all of those excuses, okay, they don't matter. It comes down to power and control. A man would not do this to someone that they do not perceive to be weaker than them, okay? It comes down to power and control. Another part of the comment was where he said, in any situation that it happens, it being domestic violence, okay? He said, in any situation that it happens, often and on, the woman might have contributed directly or indirectly, putting the responsibility of the abuser's behaviors, who, by the way, is an adult themselves, on the abused. So another part of the comment was where he said, women, learn the right time to talk to your man. And it was a very long one. I'm going to put it up on the screen so that you see it. So basically, he was just saying women should learn the best time to talk to their man. They should learn to calm him down. If he's getting escalated, then take him in, calm him down, feed him his favorite meal, whatever. There was a lot of things that he said. I'm going to leave the comments here. Okay, so again, that goes back to cultural gender expectations, which elevates the position of a male over a female. And that is why it's so common to hear things like, oh, don't talk when your husband is talking. Don't talk when he's talking. Allow him to talk. If he's vibrating, as we would say in Nigeria, you, the woman, must be the one to keep quiet and wait for him to calm down, wait for him to be approachable, because we didn't know you were living with a beast, but you have to wait for him to be approachable. Make his favorite meal, okay? Be gentle and talk softly to him. You're a woman, talk softly. Use your feminine wiles. You should not raise your voice at him. You know, all those sorts of comments, right? This comment here, what he said here, is very consistent with those expectations, okay? So male privilege. God gave man, woman, to help him. That was another line from his comments. Can we talk about religion and culture, guys? As I said in the previous part, whenever these two come together, it's always disaster. It's an explosion waiting to happen. It's a bomb waiting to go off. A lot of men take this to mean ownership of the woman, just because, according to them, God gave the woman to man. You would hear people who would say things like, it was out of the rib of a man that God made woman, not the other way around. Just speaking to that male dominance, okay? And the privileging of the male gender over the woman. So we know where you're coming from, sir, when you make these sorts of quotes. Ask yourself, I'm reading again from the comment, ask yourself, am I helping my man to be the best of himself? No, sir. You ask yourself if you're being a perpetrator by controlling, intimidating, manipulating your partner, demanding respect that you did not earn, and generally not helping her to be her best self too. It's a two-way street. Gone are those days where women were relegated to the background in their own lives, where a woman would live in the shadows, only in the shadows, never to be seen. Sometimes they say women should be seen, not heard. I feel like in our own culture, women were not even allowed to be seen. And in a lot of cultures around the world, literally, women are not even supposed to be seen. Talk nothing of being heard. If you're expecting that the woman would help you become the best version of yourself, you better pull up your bootstraps and get to work, because that woman is expecting the same. I help you, you help me. It's a partnership. It's not a dictatorship. It's not a servant-master kind of dynamic anymore. It is not her responsibility to fix you. The reasoning behind this expectation stems from the culture of placing a woman's value on her homemaking abilities, including keeping a man, bearing children, etc., etc. You know all those things. If you're someone who is in a healthy relationship where both partners are treating each other right, none of what I have said would elicit a defensive response from you in the first place, because it's a no-brainer. As a matter of fact, it would sound strange to you hearing that there are other people out there, other men out there who think that to be respected, they have to beat it out of their wives or out of their partners. It would be shocking to even hear that there are men out there who are controlling their women financially, psychologically, emotionally, mentally, and all the other ways in which power and control can be exercised. So if hearing me speak about these things raises some kind of reaction within you, a reaction bordering on anger, on being defensive, please check yourself. I know I am coming really direct in this video, but at some point, we need to be direct about these things. We're no longer beating about the bush. Domestic violence, okay, if you ask me, I would say that it has gotten to the point where it needs to be declared as a public health concern. We can't be going about every other day hearing about someone who has murdered their wives. We do not want to keep hearing such stories. And yes, like I said, abuse happens to men as well. Just a month ago, there was this horrible news here in Australia about a Nigerian man who was killed here in Australia by his ex-partner, who was a woman. So it happens both ways. But whether you accept it or not, it is a highly gendered problem, and it is one that affects women mostly. As I would always say, continue to have these discussions. Abuse thrives in silence. When people are not talking about it, it continues to thrive. Before I go, I am going to put something up on the screen for anyone out there who might be experiencing domestic abuse or domestic violence or sexual violence and wants to have a confidential chat to support services. Okay, so I am going to put up a few options on the screen, some for Australia and some for Nigeria as well. The one in Nigeria, I haven't used that service, obviously, because I live here in Australia, but I have heard a lot about this service, and it appears to be a service where you can get some help. So please avail yourself of these helplines, okay? Don't keep it to yourself. Remember, abuse thrives in silence. If you need to create a safety plan, please give a call to these numbers, and I am sure that they can help you to create a safety plan for you to escape violence, okay? If you have any questions or you want to send me a confidential email, if you're here in Australia and you need help, my email address is going to be linked in the description box. I would be more than happy to read from you and help you however I can, okay? So I'll see you again in my next video, and like I said, we're going to continue having these sorts of conversations on this channel going forward. I'll see you again in my next one. Bye bye and stay safe.